And we are live. Nick, can you hear me?
I can, Jared. How are you doing this? I guess it's evening for you in Melbourne, Australia.
Yeah, it's evening over here, and you're in the States, other side of the world.
Good day, mate.
G'day. So, quick reminder for all of our followers: Pride in the Living Room was founded by the Israeli LGBT task force Agudah in memory of the 2009 Tel Aviv Gay Center shooting and the Jerusalem Pride Parade stabbing in 2015. And Ha'agodah created this project to offer a stage and a voice for LGBT Jews from around the world to offer their stories in the hopes of sharing empathy and community. So, all of that said, it is my pleasure to welcome Nick. Nick, the floor is yours.
Well, greetings, everyone, wherever in the world or whenever this may be finding you. My name is Nick Andriole. I live in St. Louis, Missouri, where I work full-time in the healthcare industry for a major managed care company that serves members across different stages of their lives, making sure that they're able to get access to good quality, affordable healthcare. I have a background in finance and econ, and prior to working in healthcare, had launched my career in management consulting, serving the passenger airline industry. I have had the great pleasure of traveling to Israel now 4 times, including to Tel Aviv Pride last summer, pre-COVID in 2019. And it was absolutely nothing short of a life-changing experience. Never in my life did I feel more at home. Never in my life did I feel that seeing 250,000 people gathered in Tel Aviv on Hayarkon Street, symbolizing the best of Zionism, Jewish peoplehood, and people just being proud of themselves, having a good time, and making the most of the moments that bring us all together. To follow on my wonderful experience in Tel Aviv last summer in June of 2019, where I not only went for Pride, but also spent my birthday. I had the great privilege and honor of traveling on the JDC Entwine inside LGBTQ Argentina, along with Jared, and I think it was 8 other fine gay Jews or LGBT Jews from around the world, and built many lifelong friends, and hope to stay connected, and really have never felt more proud and happy to be a part of this community.
Thank you, Nick, for sharing a little bit of background into you. Um, can you take us all the way back to the beginning? Um, what sort of Jewish upbringing did you have as a kid?
So my family, I come from an interfaith family. Didn't really have much in the way of formal Jewish education. Really, it was more of a cultural, connection. I grew up. My community is probably, I'd say, went to public school, probably 35-40% Jewish. But my family, my dad's family is Catholic. So there was always that element to it, but it's always been a cultural part of me. And I've since, growing up, since going away to school, have really wanted to deepen my connection, my appreciation for, you know, being Jewish. And definitely as I work towards having a family, I definitely want to raise my kids in, a traditional Jewish household, keep Shabbat as a tradition, maybe not all of the restrictions, if you will, but definitely want to make sure that they're grounded in a strong Jewish identity, and hopefully send them to Jewish day school if, when I'm in a position to do so.
When did you start to, whether you had the vocabulary or not at the time, when did you start to realize that you were different?
I would say all my life I've always felt different. I've always kind of felt that I sort of had appreciation for different things than other people did. I've always sort of felt that I would be in a situation and I would focus on things that, maybe didn't always capture the attention of other people. But I'd say it really hit home for me probably in the US, what we would, about seventh, eighth grade. So just just finishing a secondary schooling. So right before high school. And, there was an experience I had in, I think it was a chemistry lab my sophomore year, that I had made a comment about somebody looking very attractive, and kind of, some of my friends were sort of taken aback, like, oh, like he's gay, and like, what is he trying to tell us? Like, oh, and while other of my friends really didn't seem to, weren't at all surprised, and really just want me to be happy. I would say, though, it really hit me probably at a later stage in life. I'd say probably than most people, in this time that we're living. I'd say I really came to terms with myself, my orientation, my identity, after I went away for undergrad. So, at about age 18 or 19, I would say I really, became to understand myself, and how the world sees me, and that's okay, and I'm just so fortunate that we have so many spaces like this, like groups like A Wider Bridge, groups like programming that our federations have, such as this here from St. Louis, that there's so much available for us that are, part of this double minority, if you will, these identities that, that are intersecting, really.
In some ways, being a gay Jew, an LGBT Jew, it's a minority squared, a minority upon a minority. So you mentioned a few different spaces in which you've been able to cultivate your identity. You spoke about A Wider Bridge. You spoke about your trip to Argentina, well, our trip to Argentina with
Yep.
JDC Entwine and JQ International. Um, what can you talk a little bit more about the types of spaces where you have been able to explore your the intersection of your Jewishness and your gayness, and what have those experiences offered you?
Yeah, so I am, I'd say, definitely pretty heavily involved in, public Jewish life. I'm on the board of my regional Anti-Defamation League here in St. Louis, and I'm one of the co-chairs for our young professionals outreach, and also am involved in some other national initiatives with ADL, Anti-Defamation League. And I've always really felt apart. Like, I've never really felt out, I've never really felt like I'm an outcast. I've always felt that people's interest, wanting to engage me, wanting to engage others in the LGBTQ community is really genuine. I know that that hasn't necessarily been everyone's shared experience, perhaps in some of the more traditional, more conservative, perhaps Orthodox communities. And, there's definitely a lot of work to do, and we should not, we should by no means be complacent, but I think we also at the same time need to recognize that there's been tremendous progress made, and that we really are very fortunate to have come as far as we have, and definitely need to give credit where due, just to build on, what you had mentioned. I mean, like, another big thing for me was, I was in Washington, D.C., in our nation's capital this spring for the annual APAC, American Israel Public Affairs Committee Policy Conference. And there were no fewer than, I believe, 3 different LGBTQ IA, Zionist outreach events. A Wider Bridge was there, the former director, Ty Gregory. There were a number of staffers at APAC, as well, that are a part of our community. APAC leadership on all levels also made a point to stop by. The outgoing, or I guess it's the now former Consul General Dani Ayalon, who actually is a native of Buenos Aires, was also at one of the receptions, that I went to for APAC's LGBTQ outreach. So, I mean, I think it's really, to me, it just shows that this community, there's so much that we as LGBTQ Jews have to offer, but also we really are a part of the cross-section of the global Jewish diaspora, the Israeli experience, and in my particular case, the American Jewish community. And, I think that the more that we can, all make sure that people have a seat at the table and make sure that the organizations and the spaces that we're in are meeting people where they at and how they come, I think it can only get better from here.
You've mentioned a bit of your political work and your interest in Zionism. What has attracted you to those spaces, and how has your political work aided you on your Jewish gay journey?
Yeah, and I just want to point out one thing, and I just want to push back a little. I wouldn't necessarily say it is inherently political. I think, unfortunately for us, a lot of our existence, both as a gay man and as an American Jew, does come with politics, especially as a supporter of Israel. But I think when you look at a lot of the efforts to really build a big tent and to really show that there's a bipartisan consensus for the U.S.-Israel relationship, and to show that we're living in a time that even moderate Republicans in the U.S., people to the right, are starting to, embrace the LGBTQ community. I think that it's becoming a lot less political and just a lot more about understanding people, trying to appreciate what we have to offer, and, make institutions and organizations and really the world a better place for everyone. Specific to my involvement, I've always been a champion and really a fervent supporter. And it really saddens me to see in the US the division between the American Jewish community and Israel. I think we all own this, and we really need to work together to come to the table and understand that we may not agree on everything, and understand that the lived experience of a family in Sderot is very different than an American Jewish family living in the Upper West Side or in West Los Angeles or in Boston. And that's okay. But for me, it's just been very, it's really been great to go and meet people and see that there are like-minded allies. I think speaking more from the mainstream LGBTQ perspective versus an exclusively Jewish perspective, I think we do have a lot of work that we can do to really demonstrate our longstanding, again, as from the American Jewish perspective, our longstanding support of the LGBTQ community. And I think also, looking at a lot of the history in Israel, again, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but just to show, that here in the US, it's only been about a decade now that don't ask, don't tell it was repealed for our armed forces. And, I believe that's been the case in Israel for nearly 40 years. We, within the United States, I think globally really also need to be better at combating allegations of pink washing as it relates to people or in the progressive community, with Zionism and the state of Israel, that organizations like the Agudah, events like the Jerusalem, Tel Aviv Pride, are all great things that really are meant to be unifiers. And it's really unfortunate that there's so many that take them out of context and, use it to say that they're red herrings for other criticisms, not all legitimate, that people have of the state of Israel and, certain facets of the Israeli government. And I think that's really unfortunate and really does not serve either the global Jewish community, the Israeli people, or the LGBTQ community well for this to be used as a wedge in such a divisive manner.
We've just spoken about the Jewish LGBT experience on a macro level. I'd like to go back to your story, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I can hear your passion. I can hear that you've thought about this a lot and you've researched into these issues a lot. And if there are opportunities to raise your voice, then that is an opportunity that you'll take because you think it's important. I'm interested to find out how you came to be the person you are today. So let's go back to when you realized that you were different, and then you grew up in a multi-faith environment, but Judaism was important to you, and then you realized you were gay, and then there was so you were Jewish and gay at the same time, and I'm just interested to know what that experience was like for you, and maybe how the conversations you had from those times led you to your work today.
I would say, that I'm really fortunate to have just very supportive mentors, family, friends, people in the community, people that have encouraged me to just follow my passion. I wouldn't say that I grew up, so as we air this today in August 2020, I turned 30 in June. So I grew up at a time in the Midwest, in a very progressive community in St. Louis, Missouri, where there weren't many, gay figures in my life, or in my family at the time. So I felt like I really had to kind of seek that out. And it really wasn't until I went away to undergrad in Boston that I found myself in Brookline and in Newton and right near the campus for my school, and, opportunities to also meet people, on campus that have a similar background and, interests as me. It's, for me, it's just been, it's taken time. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It's great to have allies. It's great to have people. But for me, I had always known that I was different, but it was just more a matter of coming to terms and understanding and finding that there are spaces and there are people that value me and what I'm able to bring to the table, and that you don't necessarily have to fit into that heteronormative mode, that, you can still raise a family and have children and, try to have as much of that, traditional Jewish experience, as anybody else can. And, that's where I'm really hoping that the next phase of my journey is to settle down with a like-minded partner and, ultimately have children and continue the legacy.
Have you experienced, well, first of all, have you dated non-Jewish people?
I've dated, let's see, one non-Jew, but I'd say I primarily dated in the Jewish community.
Have you considered how you would want to bring Judaism into your relationship, into your life?
Yeah, I think for me, it's again always been more of a cultural thing, but I'd say coming of age and starting my career and really seeing the value of disconnecting, every year on Yom Kippur, I completely turn off my phone. I completely just disconnect, just reflect, reflect on the year and what, going forward. And, I think that I'd like to start doing that more on Shabbats. I'd like to, maybe not every Shabbat, maybe not for the entire time, but I think there's really just a lot of value to living in the moment and focusing on what matters, and I would very much like to be in a place. I'd like to be in in an established Jewish community, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Canada or London, or maybe even Israel. Um, but I would definitely like to ultimately have my child or children in a supportive environment, something like a Schechter, a conservative school, and make sure that they're surrounded by other like-minded people who not only share the dedication to living a meaningful Jewish life, but also are accepting of me and my partner, of who we are and what we add to that fabric as parents and as cultivating the next generation.
Would you say you've experienced more homophobia or LGBT phobia from the Jewish spaces that you inhabit, or more anti-Semitism from the LGBT spaces?
Oh, without a question, I would say the mainstream LGBTQ community is really is not very inclusive of Jews, supporters of Israel. I wouldn't go as far to say that I've experienced any overt anti-Semitism in mainstream LGBTQ spaces, but I would say that I really don't feel the messaging really to me is that it doesn't feel inclusive to me, whereas a lot of these very traditional establishment mainstream Jewish organizations really are going, and congregations as well, in the conservative and reform movements here in the US anyway, really are going to great lengths to be inclusive, to take people as they come and make sure that we have a seat at the table. I think that it really is incumbent upon us, who have this unique intersecting, identities, to go to our LGBTQ partners, organizations, and really help them understand what they're missing out on, how we can engage, what we from the Jewish community can offer them. I have experienced both anti-Semitism and homophobic incidents throughout my adult life, and I'd say that unfortunately that's really what's kept me involved and keeps me working with the Anti-Defamation League, trying to fight hate, bigotry, extremism in all forms. And those lived experiences really are something that we should look to others, whether it's in the Muslim community, whether it's in the immigrant community, here in the U.S. anyway, where there's, on numerous levels, a very strong anti-immigrant sentiment. It is incumbent upon us to share, to share and aid those that have a similar experience. It's yeah.
You're just mentioning now some of the darker moments that you've had, and how those experiences, rather than being consumed by those experiences, you have taken them, um, and you have been inspired to work with organizations like the Anti-Defamation League, um, to be able to create change. And that's something really amazing. I think a lot of our viewers um, will be able to take something away from your story. A lot of us have been through the darkness, but it's really inspiring to see someone take that and build something positive, to build something full of light. So thank you for
Oh
sharing
no,
that.
most definitely. It's this really, I'm just such a privilege and honor to be asked to share my story and given this platform. And I think just more outreach and more conversation and ways to build bridges like this is the way forward, and I'm delighted to be a part of it.
I have a couple more questions,
Most
if that's okay.
definitely.
Uh, so, in the work you do, I am assuming that you sometimes butt heads with people. You are interacting with people who come from a different lived experience. They may have differences of opinion. You may have some challenging conversations with them, conversations which reach into the core aspects of your identity. So I'm just wondering, when you're having those conversations, what gives you strength in those moments?
Um, when I'm having a disagreement with someone, or when I'm at say a pride parade, or see someone with what, actually, let's take this a step back. So I would say one of the most difficult moments for me, probably in the past 2 years, would have to be when my friend Hen Mazik came on site to Washington University here in St. Louis. And, he was speaking about his lived experience in Israel, serving in the IDF as a gay man. And this, mind you, happened less than 48 hours after the white supremacist shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we, unfortunately, there were a number of student activists from, I think it was SJP, or Students Against Israeli Apartheid, that decided to come in, and rather than listen and rather than learn and then ask questions at the proper time, took it upon themselves to scream and shout Hen down while he was sharing his coming out story. Not when he was talking about Bibi Netanyahu, not when he was talking about the Israeli government or anything that should be the least bit political. And I would say that at that moment, it just really made me sad that rather than take an opportunity for learning and for growing and building greater understanding, these students detracted from the event, taking that opportunity away from others. And really, I think, again, showing me and showing others that we still have a lot of work, in that, unfortunately, the environment on the college campuses is very hostile towards Jewish and pro-Israel students particularly. And, that people would have the chutzpah to engage in that type of activity at a time when our community was in crisis. Again, this was roughly 48 hours after the white nationalist shooting at Tree of Life Synagogue, which is was one of, at the time, or still is, the single worst massacre of the American Jewish community, in our history here in the United States. I think really just shows how insensitive, and really just shows how people have their views and just aren't willing to listen and aren't willing to understand, and rather than hear hen out and then ask questions, they took it as an opportunity to scream and take away from the enjoyment and the learning of others on the campus, and people like myself from the community that were present. It's also, just overall, it really is hard for me and very saddening to me to see what so many progressive spaces have become in terms of their hostility towards Israel, in terms of their unwillingness to look and appreciate nuance. I think that, we all need to do a better job. We need to do a better job as Jews and as LGBTQ people, explaining the value that that we bring, and our specific concerns, and how divisional some of these movements, like the Women's March, comes to mind here in the US, that many in our community would definitely be inclined to support, myself included, on a number of the issues. But the willingness to embrace anti-Semitism and, Louis Farrakhan, and it really ends up turning myself and others off. And until I think a lot of progressive movements and organizations can really come to terms and take the proper action, we're all going to be worse off.
What do you like about Judaism?
Well, I like the community aspect. I like that. I live by the teachings of Hillel. If I am not for myself, who if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? If not now, when? I think that that's really a mandate, and really in order to both take care of yourself and make sure that you are in a good position to also take care of others and make the world a better place for everybody. And it also really emphasizes the need to act now, and not to act in the future. And it for me, as somebody from the has worked in the airline industry, and aviation still plays a big part in my life. When I think of if the beginning part where, if I am only for myself, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? I always think of the safety briefings of putting your own mask on the plane, the oxygen masks, to then go and help others, that, you need to be in good standing yourself and make sure that you have what you need and you're in a position to then share with others, and I think it's that balance, and I think it's that holistic commitment that I really value and really appreciate.
Something that you said earlier on, which stood out to me, is the idea that if you do live in the intersection of Judaism and the LGBT community, then there's a wonderful opportunity to speak with LGBT organizations about the richness and diversity of incorporating Judaism and Jewish values into those spaces. Um, I think that that's an idea, that's a concept that can resonate a lot with a lot of our Pride in the Living Room listeners. It's a really beautiful notion, the idea of bridging that gap from the LGBT side, which is something I haven't heard too much of over this project. So thank you so much for sharing that perspective. Um, and it's also really beautiful to hear your thoughts on Judaism. What really makes you hold on to Judaism after all of these years. So thank you for sharing that, Nick.
Yes, no, thank you. This was a real, like I said, this was a real pleasure and honor, and I'm, glad to be a part of it, and can't wait to see where this takes me, and where where it's going to, where I'm going to see myself. Right.
I have one final question before we head off.
Definitely.
And it's nothing um, political, it's nothing from a macro level. I want to go all the way down, all the way back to when you, Nick, were a young kid starting to realize that there was something unique, something special, something different about you. There was a whole life journey in front of you, the unknown, the future, and here you are all these years later with wisdom and knowledge and a life that you've built. And I just want to ask you, Nick, if you had a chance to speak to him, what would you say?
I would say just be yourself, never apologize for who you are, and always follow your heart, your passion. And when you have detractors, when you have people who say that you're different, or, have someone, engage in homophobic or anti-Semitic slurs, just use that as just as a means to make the world a better place for others, and just continue the fight. It's the world we live, certainly right now. Again, certainly, I think both, safe to say, both globally and from American perspective, we're living in an unprecedented time, amidst COVID, amidst a lot of issues around race, here in the United States. And we have a big election coming up, as I'm sure you're aware. So it's definitely, we're definitely living in a very crazy time. And I think that what we take away from this experience, and what we take away from this pandemic, should really just show the importance of supporting others, and just the need to learn and listen and grow and be flexible, be tolerant, be understanding. And the more that people, both outside, our little community within a community, but just the more that people can live by those values, I think just the world will be a more inclusive and better place for everyone.
It's such a beautiful way for us to end our time together.
Well,
I
thank you.
want to thank you again, Nick, for offering to be a part of Pride in the Living Room, Jewmos edition. Yeah, here's to sharing our story in this moment and many more moments in the future.
Awesome. Yeah, my
Thank you.
pleasure. Okay, so so the